Good morning, people of the internet. You're listening to Debi Radio 79.5 FM, a podcast where we discuss the movie Grosse Pointe Blank, 1 minute at a time. I'm Dev.
And I'm Hugh, and on today's show, we're looking at minute 93, Martin and Debbie in Martin's hotel room. Both suffering very different traumas, both trying to rationalize what's going on.
And joining us once again on today's show, we have Darren Husted of the T. Hanks for the Memories podcast. Welcome back, Darren.
Now, the thing is, guys, once you start podcasting, eventually, you get to like it.
Are you trying to persuade Dev to keep going on after we reach the end of this?
I
feel like
there
this
are worse
is the thing.
things to get to like, right?
Yeah. Well, this is it. Yeah. I mean, the thing is, I feel like now I've done this for the last couple of minutes. I've got to do it for all of them. So tomorrow is going to be very interesting. But yeah, I did put in, because in this minute I put a note like Debbie backs off from him, but I guess she started doing that in the last minute. But in this one, she really is kind of getting ready to run away. Like it's kind of noticeable.
Her pivot in this minute I really love, because then she actually kind of comes back at him as she kind of realizes where he's coming from, like why he's here, and she really does start like actually reversing that whole thing that we saw in the last minute of him stalking her. She starts like actually, fronting up to him and pushing him back.
Yeah. And it's one of those things where, again, this is the brilliant clash of rom-com and thriller, because this would always be about something very different in a rom-com, but there'd be this moment, but the stakes would not be as high, and the nature of it would not be as moral or as violent or as concerned. And in fact, I'm struggling to think of a precise equivalent from a rom-com film that I can compare it to.
I think I can give you one, and I can give you
Please.
one that came out the same year as this film, and that is Chasing Amy.
I love that film.
After they have the discussion in the hockey place about like finger cuffs. Don't want to spoil that for anyone who hasn't seen the film.
I know the bit you mean.
Yeah, but afterwards they're like outside and they're in the car park, and you have a kind of like Ben Affleck, who is like a foot taller than Joey Lauren Adams, and even without all his like Batman muscle, looks like fairly intimidating. And they're obviously arguing, and she keeps like pushing him, and then kind of walking away, and then kind of coming back and shoving him a bit more, and he keeps trying to justify what he's just done, which obviously is a terrible thing that he's done. And there is the same kind of like, not the exact same, because obviously he hasn't killed anyone, but like there is like still the tension. He's killed their relationship, but there is the same kind of tension of like one person like trying to justify something and the other person kind of. And also one of the very few times where Kevin Smith in his early times like took the camera off sticks and actually had it moving. And it's very noticeable, kind of like you have the cameras kind of going backwards and forwards between them, and like almost whipping between them as they kind of like are arguing. And I think that's not exactly the same as here, but it is kind of like, it's unusual for a rom-com to have like a full drag out argument of people just yelling and shoving each other.
Yeah, very true.
And and also for them to have people being murdered, but that's obviously what makes the film slightly different to other rom-coms, is the murdering. But this is where he justifies like he kills for money, like he says that's why he kills. That guy was coming to kill me, but normally I only kill people for money, which is not any better than just killing people, but at least it stops him from being a serial killer and just turns him into a contract killer. And then the fact that he's kind of talking about the different examples of like who he's killed, and then like his justification is where he says, I've lost my taste for it. It's like, well, you shouldn't really have had a taste for it in the first place, but okay. I mean, this isn't like, you don't like caramel anymore and you've lost your taste for it. This is killing people. And
but that's the line they always have in westerns, right? Going back to like traditional Americana and American movies and the myth of rugged individualism, that's the line in numerous John Ford films and others. I think I'm kind of losing my taste for this kind of thing. Cusack's putting himself in that role, but in the modern world, that doesn't fly anymore. As you say, Darren, it does not fly. It's not the Wild West anymore. It's so yeah, you were good at it. You enjoyed it. That's not right anymore.
I also, in all of the times I've seen this film, I never noticed this reaction of Debbie's where she kind of curls up and kind of starts covering her ears. And I think it's because in this moment, John
Yes.
Cusack is so forceful and vocal that you totally understand the reaction, but also if I think all of your attention is focused on him at that moment,
Mhm.
and her reaction shot just doesn't even register,
Mhm.
because he's this feels like a rhetoric that he's had built up, that he may like almost kind of a monologue that he's given in the past kind of feeling to it, that
Mhm.
this is the mantra he tells himself to justify what he's doing to himself as well.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, like we don't know his romantic life while he was in the military or while he's been killing people, but it is entirely possible that when he has his talk with Gross earlier in the film, and they're talking about how like he was a general in an army, like there's a possibility that he was somewhere long enough that he probably did form an attachment to someone,
Mm.
and they probably found out what he did. He might have killed them. I don't think so, because unless they were a job. But like it feels like he has given this excuse to somebody before, where he's like, he
Mm.
kills for money, and and
Mm.
so there is maybe a little bit of like, he's lost Alan Arkin as his psychiatrist. Not that he ever really had him. And I think it's funny that like some of the stuff that he said to Alan Arkin over the course of the film feels like stuff that he's rehearsed and is how he copes. And then we get to this, and he's trotting those lines out, and Debbie is just like, I don't want to hear it. Like this, you kill
Mm.
people for money. There's a bunch of dead people that you've taken people's lives. That isn't something that you can just be like, yeah, well, as long as it was for cash, then it's okay. It's like no, like it's never
Mm-mm.
okay. Like
No.
like. And I think like there are even people and we were kind of talking about like how Vietnam films are very popular and stuff. It's like the change from the 70s to the 80s is First Blood being about a traumatized veteran,
Yeah.
and First Blood Part 2 being about a guy who enjoys murdering people.
Yeah.
And I think that's the difference, is like
Yeah.
you can justify being a veteran. Me personally, not that really you should. I feel like if people went into the army because they were morally flexible, maybe they shouldn't have gone into the army. But you can justify that because it's backed up by governments and it's to do with geopolitical issues, and there's a whole bunch of stuff like that. But when you
Mm.
stop being, part of a government, and you stop being you're part of the system, and you decide to just do it because you enjoy it and you get money, you can kind of justify that. But then you can't then go, yeah, but I kind of don't like killing people anymore, and expect people to go, oh, okay then. Like, I guess before, when you were getting paid and you enjoyed it, then that was bad. But now you don't really enjoy it. Like, and obviously we're all building up like aside from being a rom-com, this is also like a one last job film where it's like,
Yes.
and so we've got to kind of have that in there, and we've got to kind of we'll get to what that well, we won't get to what that job is this week, but obviously we'll next week. But we kind of get to like the point of why he's here, and this film wraps up really quick, by the way. I was like, when I watched it
Mm.
this morning, I was like this feels like we've still got like 20 minutes to go in this film, but we have not this like
Yeah.
you guys will be done pretty quick with this after after this week. Like it
Yeah.
really wraps up fast, and I think that's because the one last job part of it is the least interesting part of the film,
Yeah.
and it's
Yeah.
mostly like the justification for him giving it up.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of what plays out this week, is like is almost saying to the audience as well, like this guy has been paid to kill. He didn't really enjoy it, but maybe he did. But it doesn't matter because he's giving it up now,
Mm.
and you are meant to be like, okay, I guess I like this guy now. Although I'm sure there are some people who watch this film and even to the very end will be like, there's no one to root here apart from you can't root for anyone apart from Debbie. Like there's not
Mm.
like I'm sure there are people who watched this and decided that they do not like Martin Blank, no matter like even his justifications in this. I mean, we're Debbie in this scene, aren't we? We're like, the
Mm.
justifications don't work. And I can
Mm.
see some people still going with that even after this week, and we get the kind of the twist of why he's in town. I could understand some people watching this and getting to the end of me like, he doesn't deserve the happy end. Like like just because he's decided he doesn't like killing people anymore. And I think that's what Debbie's saying here as well. He's like, just because you've decided you don't like it anymore, it's like, this isn't persuading me. Like,
Mm,
I still want to get out of this hotel room as quickly as I possibly can. And
mm,
she's still making footsteps towards the door, like,
mm.
as they're having this conversation. And, like I say, but it's funny because like in a rom-com, in Serendipity, this becomes the justification as to why the two leads break up with the people they're currently going out with. Or You've Got Mail. You've Got Mail famously has both Tom Hanks and Meg Ryan in relationships for the majority of the film, and it's only in the
Yeah.
last like 10 minutes that they break up with the people they're going out with, amicably. Although it's Greg Kinnear seems to be having an affair with someone, so
Right.
not as
Again,
amicable, but yeah,
yeah.
it's like
And it's Greg Kinnear. You kind of expect that.
well, yeah, and so you get the justifications of like, this is why. Oh, we like, okay, I cheated on you. We probably should break up. And then it's like, okay, well now Tom Hanks is free to stop
Yeah.
dating someone who I think is like 20 years younger than him and actually date someone who's like a contemporary.
Yeah.
And this is that scene, but obviously with a completely different twist. Of like the justification isn't working on the other person to the point where she's getting angry, and she is, as she's coming forward to him each time she goes back, she's a little further away and a little closer to the door to kind of get out of there. And like I say, just well coordinated, well blocked. Let's say, congrats
But
to
she's
the first AD. I don't know who's doing blocking on this, but
yeah.
congrats to whoever's on set, like blocking this out, because the way they
Yeah.
move in this room is really well done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But also she's the growing what I like about the way Minnie Driver does this is the growing anger. Like, as you say, she's scared and she wants to get out, but she is still mad as hell.
Yeah.
And she lets him know, and even Martin's just a little bit worried for a moment there. There's a look on his face as if to say, okay, maybe I've gone too far with this. You really think for a minute she might, start laying into him, right? In terms of punching him or what have
Hmm.
you, and rather than verbally. But it's just there's
Yeah.
the anger in her face is so real.
Yeah. Yeah, you almost can see a reprisal of that slap in the nurse's office, but with way
Yes,
more feeling, right? With
yes,
a much more forceful impact.
yeah,
I mean,
Um,
in a rom-com, this would be the pounding hands on chest thing, wouldn't it? Like, this would be
yes,
the
it
you're
would.
angry. But the thing is, she's not going to do that because he's got a gun and he's a contract killer. So you could probably
Why am
start
I
doing that,
laughing?
but there's a chance that like he might accidentally shoot. So you want to kind of keep a bit of a distance
I
with.
think also she's in more control, right? She's not. This is not a female lead that's prone to hysterics, right? This
No,
is an independent woman who, like, has her own career and is like in control of herself, and this is as close as she's gonna get to losing it.
yeah,
In this interaction, it's not a full kind of hysterical meltdown that you may have seen,
yeah,
if this film was made 10 years earlier.
yeah, absolutely. It's about intensity,
Yeah.
right, rather
Yeah.
than just yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, but it's wonderful acting.
Yeah.
I love the idea that Martin is potentially scared by her reaction. So much of what he wants is riding on her, and to watch her get angry makes him think, oh, okay, I may have just blown this completely.
Yeah. And kind of to what Robert was speaking to the other week, this is an instance of uh, Debbie actually calling out to the audience and kind of breaking the fourth wall and
Yes,
calling this out explicitly, right? Which again
yes,
helps the believability. She's had the realization that this is the brave new beginning. She's actually calling out the whole uh, premise of this story
yeah,
in this line.
yeah, yeah. And I also think there's a little we've said for the last couple of episodes with Darren, we've talked about the idea of Debbie being us, the audience. I think there's also a sense in which she's America, America dealing with, the veterans, the people, the soldiers, the people who do the dirty work to keep America clean, right? Civilian versus military kind of thing. And I think there's a sense in which she's angry at realizing a whole bunch of stuff
I
about
mean,
how things work, right?
it's a depressing analogy, but it's really good. I mean, she's basically like shaking her head and running from it, right,
Yeah,
in this
yeah.
moment.
And
And
she's
then it
small
turns
town
around,
America. Yeah,
and she realizes that actually that is what saves her,
yes,
right? And
yeah.
yeah, that's
Because it's the whole thing with the radio and the voice. Like she's not, for all her counterculture elements from being a teenager. She's still part of this town. And Martin left and left her, and she fended for herself. But we talked to, as you said, 10 years before, a film like this or rom-com like with her in it, with this character in it, would be very different. The degree of agency and the degree of personality she has is appropriate for 97, but it's also appropriate for a changing America, and it's also kind of fun because you kind of got, that's also a thing about the Cusack Aykroyd dynamic, right? Because Aykroyd, we've talked about how retro Grosser looks, but Cusack is very 90s, right? It's not quite it's not quite Nixon Kennedy, but there's something of that there, right? There's something of that kind of dynamic of the two generations, and I like that. There's all these little trace elements of American popular culture just floating through this film. That some are deliberate, some are just how it happened to be because it's the 90s, but it gives us so much meat for this. It's given us so much meat for all of these episodes of this podcast. And yeah, one more time, Debbie's us. She's the audience. She's also, mainstream America and trying to deal with its broken relationship with its killers.
I mean,
yeah.
Dan Aykroyd is a boomer,
Yeah,
like
yeah,
smack bang in the middle of like the boom.
yep,
He's very boomer.
yep,
If you've seen the last Ghostbusters movie, he is extremely boomer. And both Minnie Driver and John Cusack are extremely Gen X.
yep,
And the kind of at this point, Minnie Driver had only done a few films, but the body of work that John Cusack had done was about as Gen X as it gets.
yep,
Like the standing outside holding a boombox is like a Gen X touchstone. Like
yep.
it's like he is so Gen Xy, and a few years older than Minnie Driver. But like the to have that kind of, like you say, the different generations, it is so marked that the like Dan Aykroyd, just the way that his character jokes about stuff is extremely boomer compared to like the Gen X kind of like bored, like not really caring kind of attitude that John Cusack
Mm.
has, which obviously helps you if you want to murder people, but also if you want to be a disaffected youth, like it's cuts both ways. But I think it's funny that like like the difference in their generations is like it's not a huge amount of like age difference between the two of them. Like it's barely a decade, but
Mm,
the way
mm,
they act is so completely different that
mm.
you're like, oh yeah, this, even like I don't know that it was a thing in the 90s we particularly noticed, but like now it's
Now
like,
we
oh
do.
yeah, it's so obvious that he's a boomer and it's so obvious that he's Gen X. Like
Yeah,
there's no way to, and even like the shop clerk after the thing gets blown up, his reaction is not about like the horrific explosion. It's, oh, I gotta find another job now, which
yeah,
is like about as like kind of slackery Gen Xy as you get, of like, oh, like I didn't like that job, but at least I had a job. And
mm.
now I've got to go find another job. And that's the thing that annoys him. Not the fact that his workplace has just blown up and there's been a shootout. Like that doesn't, he doesn't care about that. He liked
Yeah,
that
well,
job
yeah.
because he could spend all day like playing Doom. He just wants a job where he doesn't have to actually do anything. And that's like the most kind of like Gen Xy of, he could have walked out of Clerks, that kid in the Ultimate. Like
Oh,
it's
yeah.
literally that
Yeah,
attitude. And I
yeah.
think John Cusack is the same in that, like, Martin Blank has that attitude, but it's more moral flexibility than slacker who doesn't want a job. Like it's a
Mm,
slightly different application of it.
mm,
Um, and obviously once we get to High Fidelity, that's probably the peak of his Gen Xiness, is
mm,
like a guy who's working in a record store and doesn't care about, like, doesn't like the customers and spends most of the time like trying to figure out what happened with all his girlfriends. Like, doesn't get more Gen Xy than that, quite frankly.
mm.
and then Jack Black walks into everyone's lives, and we're like, thank you, John Cusack, for the gift of Jack Black.
Mhm.
I remember watching that film, and I didn't know who Jack Black was. At most, I think I'd seen him in the background of like Bob Roberts.
Enemy of
And
the State.
I don't think I even paid any attention to him in that, if I'm honest. Like
Yeah, no, because
there's like
he's one.
20 other like white boys in that with like
Yeah,
skinny, like he I guess he's slightly less skinny than all the other skinny white boys
yeah.
in
He's one
who
of.
work for the NSA.
It's him and Seth Green as the nerds working for the NSA.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
and so it's like you didn't, and then like all the way through the film they keep going, oh, he's gonna sing, and you keep thinking to yourself, oh my god, this is gonna be the cringiest thing ever. He's gonna be a terrible singer, and then it gets to Jack Black singing at the end, and you're like, holy shit, this guy's a good singer. What's happening? But like the expectation that he'd be terrible is about as Gen X as things get. It's like, yeah, of course this guy's gonna be, and then he turns out to be really good.
Mm.
But yeah, no, I just like the kind of the slacker attitude of like Martin Blank is very funny because it's like, yeah, like he doesn't care, but he doesn't care in a way that is, like you say, deliberately of that generation, and
Mm. Yeah. I mean, that's it, isn't it? If you to explain this film these days, it would be like, well, it's Gen X hitman rom-com. You got to have the Gen X bit in there. It is of its time in that sense.
And also, I don't want to bring the podcast down, but pre-Columbine, so there is a certain humor
Yeah.
about killing people that
And
a couple of years later
yeah,
you could not get away with.
In the
that's
school.
a trope that's come up a few times, especially
Yeah.
with Steve Pink's character Terry Rockstad at the high school reunion carrying the pistol. It does seem kind of prescient, despite the fact that it's actually after the Dunblane massacre.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that I'm not sure that Dunblane was really reported widely in the US. Knowing
I mean, the other thing is, I think, that I think that's always been the issue. Certain people have had with 90s neo noirs and the Tarantino comedy violence thing is I feel like the reality of what was happening to people, be they military who are out there in Gulf War or people in schools getting shot, right? I feel like that's the thing that made it hard for some people to look at these films and just have a laugh at them, and understandably so, right? For all the sense of us going, oh, us film buffs going, just movies, it's fake blood, it's all that. I have always understood, like Channel 4 decided not to show the opening double episode of Homicide Life on the Street season 5, 6, whichever one is the school shooting double. And they decided not to show it first airing of the season precisely because of Dunblane. And as a school teacher, and a huge fan of that TV show, I was like, yeah, I get it. The last thing I want to do right now is see a dramatized school shooting. I didn't see it until probably 6 years later when I got the American DVD set, and then it still really hurt to watch. And Denis Villeneuve's Polytechnique, which is the reconstruction of the Montreal Polytech shooting from '88, which is what caused the Canadians to ban personal ownership of automatic weapons. That I've seen that film now, and I've never forgotten it, and I can't watch it again, but I know it inside out because it is so hard to watch, even though it's a fictionalized version of what really happened. And I think there's something to be said for that's not entertainment, right? That's not, you don't sit down and have a laugh with that. Grosse Pointe Blank, you sit down and have a laugh with it. And I think I'm kind of grateful to Cusack and his production team for making this when they made it the way they made it, because I think there is a clear, careful balance of presentation of the violence and enough discussion of the seriousness versus what's silly and what's funny, that the film still goes down as an entertainment today, right now, when I
yeah,
watch it.
yeah, without romanticizing the violence, right? Like
Yeah.
the violence is not something that you're seeking out in this, which I think becomes the kind of crutch that a lot of action falls into.
Yeah.
Especially a short time after this.
Yes. Yeah. It's always everyone. One of the downsides of the wonderful film The Matrix is that for several years afterwards, everyone was talking about where's the next sequence, right? After that lobby sequence,
Yeah.
everyone was like, every action movie was trying to have one of those, and they didn't know how to do it properly, and they didn't know how to do it well, and you ended up with some really weird, disturbing sequences from various films. And I think so. In a weird way, The Matrix both caused that and also kind of ended it, because they did it in a way that was very clear. And your only way to do that is either you accept that you're on the side of the people killing you accept that you're Cusack and you're killing Grosse, right? In the Matrix, right? Keanu is Gen
Yeah.
X, right? You accept that, and you don't worry about the fact that the guys in the uniforms it's our military, it's our police, it's our CIA. You don't do that.
Yeah. All right.
I think
we...
it's probably. I just want to quickly
Oh.
say, I think it's probably why they struggled a little bit with getting a sequel, kind of after this, because like within like 18 months of this film coming out, 2 years, you've got a couple of school shootings, and it's like, well, like it's a little harder to, and then also you get 9/11, and it's like it's a little harder to kind of then make it light of killing people when America is mourning like this massacre.
Yeah, and also, I mean, it's hard to imagine where you go with this, right? Because
Yeah.
to keep the tone with the same character set is going to be very difficult to keep it interesting.
Yeah.
Because they did kind of wrap things pretty well. And
It's
the
very
two ways to
self-contained,
go,
isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, every story arc kind of resolves itself, except
Yeah.
possibly a little bit Marcella. I would have liked to have seen one final scene of Marcella, but that's mostly because I just want to see more Joan Cusack always.
I mean, we get her in the next episode, so
we do.
we can
I am
delve
so
into
excited because it's my favorite scene of her. Maybe we should just wrap here and
Yeah,
get on to
let's
that
do
minute.
that. Let's do
talk
that.
more
Let's
about
go
Joan
for it.
Cusack.
All right, this was minute 93 of the Grosse Pointe Blank podcast, Debi Radio 79.5 FM, featuring co-hosts, co-writers, and co-producers Dave Soligar and Hugh David.
Today's guest was Darren Husted, of T. Hanks for the Memories podcast. Darren, where can we find more on you and your works?
I mean, if you like the hilarious title of T. Hanks for the Memories, which is about obviously Tom Hanks, if you like that as a podcasting thing, then you can always listen to I've Made a Huge Mistake, which was the exact opposite. I didn't make a huge mistake. I talked about Arrested Development, except maybe for like the last season, maybe that was a huge mistake. I don't know. I mean, you'll have to watch it to judge it. But yeah, you can, if you search for my name and put I've Made a Huge Mistake, you'll probably find that podcast as well. It's one of the few where I was the host for the whole thing. So if you're enjoying this voice and you want to listen to it for I don't know 70 something episodes, then be my guest.
And much talk of frozen bananas, I'm sure.
Oh yeah, I mean the thing is that there's always money in the banana stand, so it was a fruitful discussion point.
You can find us on all good podcast players, presumably including what you're listening to us on, or if you're watching us, that would be on YouTube. We're also on X and Spotify, and all of those is at Debi Radio, as well as on our website, debiradio.com. And for each and every one of those instances of the word Debi, it is DEBI, as Debbie Newbury is spelt in the movie.
And finally, if you want to talk with us, come and meet us on the Facebook listeners group, which is one last time DEBI, Debi Radio 79.5 FM Fan Club. That's Debi Radio, DEBI Radio 79.5 FM Fan Club.
Sure was clear that all of this was new. Concentrating hard like a little girl, smoking for the first time. It wasn't a moment, it was a feeling.